In this little lesson, we'll learn about rook and pawn versus rook endgames, and in particular, ones where the one pawn is already very far advanced, just one square away from promotion. However, the rook is right in front of it, protecting it, and therefore the rook cannot easily move away because the pawn would be lost. So in these positions, White's only plan would be to move the king up to protect the pawn and then move the rook away. But let's see how all this works out. Right now it is Black's turn in our example. And Black has to be very careful. There are two things that Black needs to be really careful of. One is that never to move the king away from the 7th rank. For example, after king f6, White would immediately check and then just promote the pawn and easily win the game. So that's out of question. The same way king g6, rook g8, or king h6, rook h8, and so on. The other trick that Black really must avoid, and that is king f7. Then the problem is rook h8, threatening to promote the pawn, and if rook takes, a skewer comes from the side, winning the rook. Again, has to be avoided. Let's go back. After seeing how king f6 loses, king f7 loses, let's see what's wrong with giving a check. That's pretty bad because now there are no more checks to give. There is too short distance between the black rook and the white king. And if now the rook would try to pressure the pawn from the side, again, the rook cannot just move away without losing the pawn. Well, that's not quite true, because the rook can sacrifice itself with a check, not giving black the time to take the pawn, and when king takes, promote the pawn and winning the rook right away. Okay, so we saw that rook c1, not a good idea either. So black basically needs to keep this position. And the only two good ways to do that, the simplest is just move the king back and forth to h7 and g7. The other option is to move the rook all the way back to b6, and then when the king starts moving up, then move the rook back. And then just keep waiting with the rook b1, b2, and when the king moves to c6, then start checking with the rook. As we said, rook b6 is one option, and then the other option is, which is my preference, just keep moving the king between g7 and h7 back and forth. King c4, king g7, king c5, king h7, king c6, and then start with some checks, and check, and check. And now we could give a couple more checks, but it's simplest, just go back behind the pawn, and white cannot make progress. Let's see now a trickier situation. In this position we have a few more pawns on the board. It's 2 pawns versus 1, but it's white's turn. And now comes the really surprising part. White here has the opportunity to win a second pawn by capturing the pawn on g3. However, that would be a major mistake, because believe it or not, in this position, despite white having 2 extra pawns, not just 1, the same principle works and white still cannot make progress to win this game. For example, king g7, g4, king h7, g5, king g7, g6. Again, the king cannot take the pawn because of the rook g8 coming. Just keep waiting with the rook now. Now the king cannot move back and forth anymore. But with the same principle, as soon as the king is next to the pawn, protecting it, threatening to just move the rook out and then promote the pawn, that's when we start giving the checks and we draw the game. So let's go back to this position where we took the pawn. How can white still win the game? Amazingly, by not taking the pawn, but pushing it forward. The difference is that now white will have still 2 extra pawns because we'll win the g3 pawn, but one of the other pawn will be on the f file and not on the g file. So let's say black tries the same strategy, just keep waiting. The problem now is that after f6, black has to choose between 3 unpleasant options. One is to take, but as we already know, check and then promote. Move the king to f7, which we already also learned. Then comes rook h8, and then the skewer. After rook takes, the rook will come to h7. And finally, if the king would move to h7, then the f pawn can move forward, and then again one of the 2 white pawns will promote. So what did we learn about these type of endgames that we have? We learned that if we have an f pawn or e or d as the additional second pawn, white is easily winning. However, we also learned if we have a g pawn, the game is a draw. And additionally, if the pawn is a rook pawn, remember that is also a draw. White cannot make progress with a rook pawn either. So if there is one side on the other side of the board, in this case it's a b pawn, right? With the rook right in front of it. And an additional h pawn, it's a draw. Additional g pawn, no, we're not taking the rook, not taking the pawn. Additional g pawn, still a draw. However, when we had the additional f pawn, the game is a win. Hope you enjoy this little lesson.